Well, as we continue our conversation about partnerships in the sustainability space, excited now to bring in some folks working on the government side of things. We have a number of folks that are going to be joining us from a lot of different aspects of the federal government, and I'll invite them to join us up here on stage to hear what they have to say in terms of their work, their efforts, and how really I think it's an interesting discussion about the cross-collaboration across some of these different aspects of the federal government, these different agencies, as well as the federal, state, and local partnerships that we can hear about and that folks are working toward in this space. Joined as well by Martha Williams, who you heard from earlier. Excited to welcome Martha back to the stage, the Fish and Wildlife Service Director. Seated next to Martha is Charles Sutcliffe, the Chief Resilience Officer for the Louisiana Governor's Office of Coastal Activities. Next to Charles is Kristen Thomasgard, the Program Director for the Department of Defense's Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program. And last but certainly not least, Gloria Montaño Green, the Deputy Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation within the Department of Agriculture. And Gloria, I'll start with you because, obviously when we're talking about sustainability and agriculture, I suppose USDA kind of feels like almost the cool kid in the room here. But how is it that the Department of Agriculture is working with some of these other federal and state partners to work with the land across the country, not only from a production agriculture standpoint, but from a ecological sustainability standpoint?
Thank you for that. So first, just want to wish everybody a happy Valentine's. And as a good Arizona girl, I couldn't actually do it without saying happy birthday to Arizona as well, if I could just take that moment for us. So I think the investment in the partnership, it's great to hear that NRCS is being considered the cool kid in the room, but I think we've always been part of that collaboration and trying to think of how our flexibility in our programs and our knowledge of what works best across the country can be able to be leveraged to address respective solutions. Being in the corridor announcement that we just made last year in Wyoming, to be able to think about how are we thinking about collaboration with the Department of Interior, the governor of Wyoming, to be able to look at the grazing land investments, looking at the Department of Defense on the Sentinel land. Again, as an Arizonan, right, for me, it was really great to be able to see that initial investments, to be thinking about how water, land encroachment, and that preservation of the southern part of Arizona is a part of the solution. It's part of our DNA, right? And I think most of it, as can be seen part of this room here, with NACD and NRCS collaboration is really important to be able to be out throughout the country, because we can't do it alone. And in some ways, we're not the door that wants to get in. Whenever we knock at the door, sometimes people really want to answer it, and sometimes others might answer it if we bring along another partner. And so we need to be able to think about that collectively, or some of the priorities that we need to be able to go to be able to think about how are we strengthening agriculture, how are we investing in the respective needs that we are. And as a partner Interior, as a Department of Defense, as a partner to the state, or as a partner to the tribal partner is going to be important. So we've been doing quite a few of those. We just announced yesterday the Inflation Reduction Act initial launch, and we know that investment in that is going to require partnership quite a bit, because we can't do it alone for where the selections need to be, but also the practices and the investments to move forward.
Mm-hmm. So I want to stick with maybe some of the federal entities that might be a little bit better known in this space. So Martha, I'm going to skip to you, because obviously we talk about the USDA and NRCS role in this conversation, but Fish and Wildlife, a very well-known partner in the agricultural and broader sustainability space. How have you seen partnerships unfold just within your time at Fish and Wildlife?
Great question. I mean, I think I've seen them unfold as being ever more important. And then I think with the bipartisan infrastructure law, Inflation Reduction Act money, then I think it maybe it's brought us to the table in a little bit of a different way, where I've seen the Fish and Wildlife Service become more of a connector. I think of us as a small fish in a big sea. We're not the cool kid in the room, but our role is to connect opportunities and I think provide that technical assistance. And we know how to deliver. We have projects ready that we've already been working with the community that we can help bring forward and get done. So I think perhaps it's being the eyes and ears on the ground and pulling people together we've always done that, but we've got to do it more and more.
Well, and of course, I think, Kristen, I think you represent a program that is a good example of this, of efforts on sustainability that are taking place, maybe outside of some of the traditional government channels that folks might be more familiar with. So I guess just kind of to frame up the conversation, can you just maybe walk the folks in the room through what your program is and how it might impact, farmers and ranchers and folks managing the landscape in the United States?
Sure, thanks so much for that question. And I guess we're the unexpected kid in the room. And I think over the years, there's been some really incredible opportunities for DoD to start partnering. The program that I represent in DoD really works exclusively outside the fence line of our installations, our training areas, our military ranges, with a really large, diverse set of partners. And the way that partnership works really is to partner at the state and local government level with conservation organizations and look for ways that we can help to promote land uses that ultimately are compatible with military mission, military activities. And what that means is we work very closely with farmers, foresters, ranchers, folks who can help to protect open spaces. We in DoD do some things on our lands that bother our neighbors. We make noise, we create dust, we like dark skies, dark spaces in which to operate. That happens to be pretty compatible with a lot of producers, with a lot of farmland, forest land, ranch land. To stick to the Arizona connection, the former deputy commander at Fort Huachuca used to say, the cows don't care. The cows don't care when we operate over the top of those ranches. And in fact, many of the ranchers that neighbor Fort Huachuca in southeastern Arizona really appreciate the relationship that they have with the installation there. The fact that what they're doing on their land is really helping to preserve, protect, enhance that national security mission. And that's something that's very important to those landowners. And so really fostering and building those types of relationships has been the foundation of what the REPI program has done. And I'm also wearing a second hat up here as a representative to the Federal Coordinating Committee for the Sentinel Landscapes Partnership. And you heard that mentioned. That includes both the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, and Department of Defense. And we're actually looking at expanding that partnership to include even more partners, NOAA, FEMA, as we look at opportunities for further climate resilience, sustainability in those landscapes that are so critical to the military. And the last thing that I'll say relative to the importance of these relationships and partnerships to DoD is that DoD is a member of the community of the county in that state. We are not an enclave in and of ourselves. Yes, we have fence lines, and that often makes it look as if we are isolated from or separate from the communities and the lands around us. But we are incredibly dependent upon those landscapes. We're incredibly dependent upon the water security and the food security that is absolutely critical to national security. And without those things coming together and working in close collaboration and partnership, the Department of Defense can't do their mission. And we can't provide the training and testing spaces that are necessary for the million men and women who volunteer to serve in the armed forces. And we owe them the opportunity to have access to the best space possible to do that training. And that happens in partnership with the communities, landowners, and our state and federal partners that operate in those spaces.
Very good. Well, Charles, I didn't mean to save you until last, but I thought it made sense to go from a federal conversation back down to a state conversation. And I wonder if you could just kind of walk us through, obviously, Louisiana, very fascinating ecological set of challenges that you and your colleagues must face at the state level. Can you walk us through some of the things that are going on right now and how collaboration with federal partners, with maybe parish partners in Louisiana, as well as with producers, can you walk us through how partnerships are helping you address some of the ecological challenges you're facing?
Absolutely, thanks. And I just noticed I'm the only one that didn't bring my notes up here, so I hope you grade me on a curve, everybody. I should have done that. So yeah, welcome to New Orleans, welcome to Louisiana. Happy Mardi Gras, in addition to Happy Valentine's Day. Yeah, we are. Here we are, a coastal state at the bottom at the mouth of the Mississippi River on top. So we've got a bunch of issues kind of happening at once there. Here inside New Orleans, we're protected by a $14.5 billion hurricane protection system right now. And so if you go to the north, you'll hit Lake Pontchartrain, which is basically the Gulf of Mexico. If you go to the east, you'll hit the Gulf of Mexico. And if you go to the south, you'll hit the Gulf of Mexico. And so we've got these a lot of conservation and ecosystem issues that kind of go hand in hand with our economy and our community safety, which is what a theme Martha brought up earlier today. So we're working on that, and so through all these different types of disasters and opportunities that we've been facing, collaboration has been a huge part of it. So we are shopping around right now our coastal master plan. It's our fourth coastal master plan that we've done. It started in the days after Katrina, but to develop that, it really involves talking to people on the ground about what they're seeing, what projects they want to see, but we also have NGOs and federal agencies and state agencies in the room helping us shape kind of what that plan looks like and how those plans get turned into projects on the ground. We've got a climate action plan, which is a new thing for us. It's turned a year old this month. That also, again, kind of brought together different types of entities that are important. So we had industry in the room, we had utilities, again, we had federal agencies, we had a scientist from DOI actually help us on that. And again, we're trying to work in a bottom-up way, which I know is the approach of conservation organizations, to kind of figure out what does action look like in a state like Louisiana so that we can kind of meet local needs, but also address these very big, very real problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we talked in the previous panel with some of the private sector companies about the role of public-private partnerships in this conversation, and just kind of in the broader subject of improving sustainability and improving ecological status across the country. And I'd kind of like to hear just how those partnerships are working in your respective entities. And Gloria, we can start with you, just kind of discussing, if you could, sort of the role of public-private partnerships as you see them at USDA, as well as some changes that you might see coming just regarding the consideration of Congress passing things like Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of public-private partnerships on the books already, but I have to imagine all of you have more coming as a result of those pieces of legislation. Gloria?
Yes, I think the public-private partnerships is really key and core of USDA work. I mean, not in the NRCS space, but for example, the crop insurance work to be able to provide that risk management tools is an entire agency that is rooted in it. I think with the other aspects of it, specifically the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act that we have moving forward, we just did implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law at NRCS. And that's going to require to be able to understand what is that ecosystem needs, what are the demands of the change, what are the industry, how are farmers and ranchers preparing for those investments. The Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, which we did last year, which is outside that work, has a very much a public-private partnership, because there are some roles that maybe the government shouldn't be having, and government can be able to help inform or can help collaborate with, but there is definitely a role of the private industry and how they can be able to engage. So I think there's definitely lots of opportunities moving forward. The upcoming announcements, probably not so much to share, but I think that continued collaboration. How are we learning from each other? What is those standards that we need to be considering? How are we thinking about what are we doing to strengthen agriculture versus having solutions that aren't necessarily keeping ag in ag, and making sure that we're able to produce, be able to feed our country, be able to move forward. So, but we've definitely been working on some great ones with the bipartisan infrastructure law, having those investments in targeting areas where they hadn't been previously served with our watershed investments that we move forward. The Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities definitely showed up, that $3.1 billion we announced last year, having those great, I think about the collaborations happening with very local conservation districts, and then the work that they're doing with major industry to be able to think about how are we doing climate resiliency together and learning from it, to think about the scalability of it for across the entire spectrum of the supply chain.
Well, you mentioned the partnerships. I suppose you've probably heard more times than you can count both the undersecretary and the secretary saying, what was the exact number of full demand on partnerships for climate smart commodities? They rattle off that number all the time. I think it was approaching somewhere in an $18 to $20 billion range.
$18 to $20 billion, and it was definitely a very hard decision making. So the demand was much higher.
And for an original $1 billion program, one can't argue that the demand isn't out there for sure.
To be able to mention words from the undersecretary, it's like, we designed it, We had some thoughts. We had a lot of feedback to be able to inform it because the feedback came from private industry, from individual farmers, ranchers, and to be able to share what do we need to hear versus like what are the concerns and the pressures. And then we designed it based on that feedback, and the result was very overwhelming, which shares that desire and the way that we showed up with it is definitely wanted, right? And so we didn't say, here's a prescriptive way that government feels it needs to occur. Instead, we said, here are the problems we need to solve. We need to seek solutions. Can we all come together and provide those proposals? And I think that's really what we do with the partnerships collectively across the federal family. I'm just thinking about the work that we do with Interior. Many times it gets to thinking of, here's the problem we have to solve on water management issues. Yesterday we announced the Water Smart work, and it's really thinking of where our authorities lie, where's our rules that we can go, where do yours lie, having a very similar problem, and can we think about putting together these pieces of the puzzle to be solution-oriented to rise to the responses that we're hearing? Because, we are hearing many concerns across agriculture. The Farm Production and Conservation Department includes Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Services, Risk Management. So we're working on indemnity disaster losses with FSA, while we're also thinking about climate resilience to be able to help these farmers and ranchers to mitigate some of those disaster items moving forward. So we have to think about how are we thinking about solutions and collectively working together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Martha, let's role play here. I mean, you get a call from Gloria or one of her colleagues at USDA looking to solve an issue that might be in line with some USDA and DOI, maybe cross-jurisdictional issues. What happens on your end of that phone call? What are the things that you need to determine to assess where that cooperation between what that federal entity cooperation is going to need to look like?
Well, in role playing then, I might even back up one step in that one thing I think the team put together by this administration, what I've seen so far, and I mean this very sincerely, is we are working together, sorting through really tough issues, I think better than I've ever seen before, that cross-agency, cross-bureau coordination. So in the role-playing, I would like to think that we'd already anticipated those and coordinated what we could do together before I even get that call. But were I to get the call, then I would really dive in and figure out how we help. And so I think it's a really important question for all of us as we're talking about partnerships. I think so often we think about public-private partnerships, but it also very much requires coordination amongst the federal agencies so that we are leveraging and sequencing our work to be more effective. And let me give an example. The Fish and Wildlife Service has a program that I bet many people don't even know about, is the Fish Passage Program. So that's through bipartisan infrastructure law. We've had this once-in-a-generation investment in the program. It's still very small. And so where we make the biggest impact is we're coordinating with FEMA. We're working closely with USDA, Department of Defense, Army Corps, all of these different components. We're sitting down together and saying who is doing what in what watershed, and how can we sequence and coordinate our projects. So that's my answer. Hopefully we have coordinated before I even need to get that call, but when I get the call, I'm gonna jump on it because we're all in the same team. And we all, I think, share wanting to deliver for everyone. We just want to get things done.
Mm-hmm. Charles, let's bring you back into the fold here because wondering what does the current public-private partnership framework look like in your office, and knowing that there could be this influx of federal funding coming down to the states through the infrastructure law, through the Inflation Reduction Act. How do you anticipate that could change going forward?
Yeah, it kind of plays out in a couple different ways for us. So on the coastal side of our office, as was mentioned earlier, 80% or so of Louisiana's land is privately held. And so this private even if we want to spend public dollars or oil spill dollars on a major restoration project that everybody agrees is necessary, we've got to have that relationship with the private landowner. We've got to work through land rights, and we've got to work through all these different things to kind of to actually do our job. And so that's one big place where we are just always kind of together in the same room. It's getting more interesting as carbon crediting is kind of becoming bigger and bigger. We're trying to figure out how we kind of enhance that partnership going forward there. So that's kind of on the coastal side. On our climate action plan, it's just so obvious to everybody that just the governor's office or the federal government doesn't have every lever to change everything that they want to change. And so I am thankful for Bill and Ira, the two big funding streams that are going to just provide so many different kind of excuses for us to partner with industry, whether it's in the agriculture industry and building on programs that already exist, or if with the utilities space or some of our other larger refiners or chemical manufacturers. There's so many places in there where we can kind of meet together on shared goals to improve the environment and public health that I think are going to really make it real in ways that are we might not have been able to see without it.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned the Sentinel project. I'm wondering if we might be able to drill down on that and kind of look at it maybe as a case study of sort of some of this intergovernmental cooperation. How, what can you tell us about the kind of the lifespan of that project and how you've seen it work thus far?
Sure, absolutely. And I want to say on the front end that I always find it interesting to be in these spaces as DOD. So this is the one time that DOD doesn't have the biggest budget in the room. DOD did not get bill money. We did not get IRA money. Now, don't get me wrong, DOD's budget is substantial. But in the conservation space and in this space where we're partnering with our colleagues on the federal and state level, our budget's actually significantly smaller, but we have some flexibility and an opportunity to be really innovative and actually help pull some of the pieces together on the capacity side. And that's where I think the Sentinel Landscape Partnership has been so incredibly valuable. It's actually the 10th anniversary this year of the Sentinel Landscape Partnership. So really a celebration for the entire year of 2023, looking at that and what does that look like for the next 10 years. And the Sentinel Landscape Partnership came together because the Department of Defense saw that, one, we had challenges around our installations in the landscapes that we were dependent upon that we could not solve by ourselves, that we had to work with our federal partners, our state partners, our local partners, private landowners, in order to address those challenges. We also discovered that we were working in the same spaces that our partners in USDA were working. In fact, we were talking to the same landowners, and we didn't know it. And so we realized, well, what if we actually did this on purpose, not by accident? What if we actually went out and looked at landscapes where DOD had interests, where our partners in USDA, where our partners at Department of the Interior, where we were all working already, but not necessarily working together. And what we discovered very quickly was that there was incredible local interest, local passion, local commitment, but oftentimes not enough local capacity. And so what we tried to bring through the Sentinel Landscape Partnership was some of that capacity support. These have to be locally driven. They have to start and work at the local level. There was a very conscious decision amongst the federal agencies at the beginning of the Sentinel Landscape Partnership endeavor that we were not going to identify landscapes around the country that were important to us at the federal level, but that we were going to look at where we had overlapping interests and where those interests were supported locally, and those partnerships could build from the ground up and then bring resources to support those local partnerships. And so I think what Sentinel Landscapes has really helped to bring, and there are now 11, there's 10 that everyone knows about, and there's an 11th Sentinel Landscape that's going to be rolled out very, very soon. And we're looking at growing the number of landscapes over the next year. So we will be putting out a new call for applications for Sentinel Landscapes later this spring, March, April timeframe. So stay tuned for that. But I also would encourage folks, while there are only 11 Sentinel Landscapes, the Department of Defense has over 120 REPI projects around military installations across the entire United States. And each of those represents an opportunity for local partnership. And so for anyone here who's interested in just exploring, talking about what opportunities could look like, bringing innovative ideas to the table, I do have some time carved out this afternoon. Just a little public service announcement. I'll have a space, I believe it's the Iberville room in the River Tower, that I'll be this afternoon. If anyone wants to come and talk about partnership opportunities, if you're already working with an installation and have questions, I will be there and would love to engage with folks in small groups or one-on-one to answer any questions or talk about what we could do together. So just want to offer that as we continue to build that partnership.
Very good, folks. Well, as was the case in the last panel, if you do have any questions that you'd like to pose, please feel free to make your way to the microphone. Looks like we do have somebody that's making the way there right now. Again, same request holds. If you could give us a name and location and what you do on a daily basis, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Good morning. Grant Victor from Afton, Oklahoma. And this is so unique to see agencies and departments working together. And for the sustainability of agriculture and for what we all need and for environment, this is the pattern that needs to take. I have one point, one concern. The maneuverability for people that are farmers and ranchers that are highly financed or corporate farms or something like that, they have the ability or maneuverability to take advantage of a lot of the programs. And we all know where we need to go. We all know what we need to do. But my concern is, as we move into this with doing more cover crops and working with a lot of different things, is that we don't leave people behind and we don't make a larger gap between our small farmers and our socially disadvantaged farmers. And sometimes for them, the practicality and the complexity of them leaves them out. And I just ask that when we look at all this, to remember the importance of these people and how much of a difference. We all have the same goals. We all have the same direction. But not everyone has the same voice. Thank you.
So as he makes his way back to his chair, I mean, just thoughts generally from any of you on ways that you all work to, perhaps increase the applicability of some of these projects for smaller farmers?
If I could add, I think just thank you for that comment. Definitely appreciate it and agree with many of that. I'll just use the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities as one of the examples of how we were able to leverage it. Yeah, sorry, it was not necessarily like a collective federal family partnership. But we understood if you're going to try to put forward the request to be able to think about how are we looking at these climate smart commodities and investment practices, that you need to think about the climate resiliency and also what is the future of agriculture and the underserved communities. So for those that participated in it, it was very clear up front that the proposals needed to have both of those items in there to be able to move forward. Because if we're going to be seeking sorts of solutions, that sustainability needs to be thinking about it in people, sizes of agriculture, the diversity of agriculture, as well as the natural resources items that we need to be considering. I think that is one of the items that we've definitely taken on. The Secretary was here yesterday. He's definitely tasked us to have a very thoughtful strategic plan to move forward, to be thinking about climate smart agriculture and forestry, but also be thinking about equity. Because we need to be thinking about that next generation of farmers, the underserved farmers that maybe haven't always had access to these programs. So removing those barriers really is thinking of asking questions simply. That's the beginning of where the partnerships need to happen, which is who has come into the door, how have they come into the door, who has not come into the door, and maybe the path isn't there for them yet. So how do we establish it? We've made adjustments with the watershed program for the bipartisan infrastructure law to specifically take that pause back and how we were developing that formula and that outreach and that education to bring people into the mix. I'm using these as examples of how we've decided to take some pauses and think about our program implementation and where is that? And I know, I know NACD is also considering that as well as they're looking at their respective membership and their partnerships they're having at the state level, at the local level, regional level of what is the growing farmer, what are the farmers that have been working in this community that might not be involved. And so equity is definitely, you can't really think about those partnerships without thinking about, do we have the entire room filled with the folks that need to be filled?
Mm-hmm. Martha, how does the Fish and Wildlife Service consider small producers as it looks to kind of integrate them into its programming?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's a concern that we all need to pay attention to. And so I can think of, kind of some specific ways that the Fish and Wildlife Service can help with this. One is to reach out to the community instead of waiting for people to reach out to us, so for us to be proactive. We're also really working, I know our partners program, biologists work with the landowners and provide technical assistance. We've talked about even, for example, in some communities, we need to do that in Spanish or in different languages. And then I also think about the grant programs. How do we simplify them? The tension of needing to demonstrate that we are using the money carefully, that we are following all of the rules that we have to, but at the same time try to streamline and make that process less onerous so that we bring more people in. So I just think it's a really important question for us all to be addressing and talking about. And I would end with, if there are suggestions in how we can help in this manner, I think we're open to that as well.
Very good. I think we've got time for one more question. I see we've got a gentleman with the microphone. Again, please introduce yourself and let us know what your question
Spencer, thank you. Gene Schmidt, a supervisor and producer from Northwest Indiana. And as we talk about sustainability and we're addressing resource base, I just hope we don't overlook the social part of that resource base. And the reason I say that is we look at both the private sector and the agency, we struggle across rural America, not only the general populace, but the tribal areas and the underserved in leadership. So maybe in that sustainable process, we heard from the general yesterday, it's hard to make change without leadership. You can't make that change. So maybe in this whole sustainability subject, we can talk maybe within the partnership that maybe some type of leadership training, some collaboration to improve that. We need that leadership clear across rural America, and as operations gets larger, we have a fewer populace to grab from. But that's so important if we're going to make this happen. And again, as I reiterate what the general said yesterday, it's hard to accept change, and without leadership, you can't get there. So let's just not overlook the social aspect of that sustainability of rural America and ag as we see it. So if those, both the agency and the private sector, maybe some collaboration to help us down that road.
So, any thoughts jump to mind from any of you with that phrasing that was mentioned there? I mean, just thoughts on what the federal government, state governments, et cetera, can do to bring along the leadership at the local level to improve upon some of these desired outcomes?
So I can just maybe share that in the last year and a half, we've been talking a lot about the climate smart work. I'm not going to mention the state, but I went to one state at the very beginning of this process to talk about it, and was very not accepting, right, about where the conversations were. Follow-up investments with the state conservationists, et cetera, was really to think about, how do we think about the problem that needs to be solved? Not the language to be used, but the problem we need to be solved. And what are the solutions to those problems we need to solve? In the last few months, I've gone back to that state. And it was very much embracing of climate smart agriculture and the investments that need to happen to be able to have like the conservation practices. And so I think maybe, I took that question in two ways. Is one, we need to help inform the leaders and to be able to make sure that the ecosystem are there. The biggest thing that we have at FPAC, at USDA, is word of mouth is like the strongest way to be able to convince others to participate or to be able to understand the value of it. So we've been working on how do we do that storytelling. But the other is thinking about that next generation of that resiliency that needs to come in, because sustainability is the people. And so how are we thinking about the recruitment of staff collectively? That is something that all the partners here have. How are we better engaging college students to want to be part of public service, to be part of moving forward? How are we actually having those conversations at the high school level? And making sure individuals understand that working in these industries and doing public service to be solution oriented is really important. So, you know, we talk about it a lot on the STEM recruitment, et cetera. So I took that question in two ways of how we're engaging. We have in some areas done even like, you know, high school conversations to be able to think of, to return to rural communities, there are jobs and opportunities that are thriving. And in some ways in agriculture, it's probably the greatest growing career industry that might not be even understood and known by many folks. And so we are definitely working on how we return and have that, like, you know, the secretary calls it the circular economy. And in some ways it's like the circular people as well to make sure that return.
Very good. Well, folks, we've got about a minute or two left here, and so I wonder if you could, I may be getting a little bit new agey here, but I wonder if you could think of just, you know, one word that describes, you know, the relationships that could potentially occur across the federal government, across federal and state partnerships, state and local partnerships. If you think of, you know, one word, one phrase that really describes the possibility for you, what would that be? And Martha, I'm gonna put you on the spot here first. You know, what do you think is the best way to very briefly describe the possibility across these partnerships?
Well, I'll go back to what I started with, in that the Fish and Wildlife Service is the little engine that can get things done, because we realize we are small, and the way we get things done is by working with others. Period.
Charles, your thoughts?
I'll pick the word maybe catalytic. I think if we all are actually having these partnerships together, we can really lay some groundwork for things that can help us really jump further ahead than I think we can do by ourselves.
Very good. Kristen?
I think I would pick the word innovation, and there are two phrases that came to mind when you asked that question, Spencer. One was uncommon partners lead to uncommon results. And the other is, if you're trying to get somewhere that you've never been, you're gonna have to try something you've never tried. And so that means we're gonna have to work together in different ways than we have in the past. And I think we're gonna have to bring different partners to the table. And I think that's the role that I've always enjoyed working for the Department of Defense, is oftentimes we come into this space and really surprise people. And I think that has been a really great opportunity. And I think we've been able to accomplish some really great conservation work as a result of that dynamic that DoD can bring to the table. So excited to work with all of you.
The phrase that popped into mind was work smarter, not harder. And I think that's one of the things, right? Many of the conversations is we were having all these other conversations on our own, and then we thought about how could we collectively and leverage our resources and money. So it's an easier shop for those who want to participate, and also a better stretch for our collective dollars. And I think that's just really the fundamental. How do we show up stronger for some of these solutions that we need to be dealing with?
Very good. Well, what an exciting conversation that we had here. I learned a lot, and I hope all of you did as well. Please join me in thanking our panelists.